You are about to experience Jackson Snyder Presents. We will examine the life of our Master Yeshua by discovering his ancestors, family, and friends, by reviewing rare ancient manuscripts, and speaking to those who know him best. From the Vero Essenes Yahad, now experience Jackson Snyder Presents.
The title of this study is The Second Coming of Melchizedek, or Why the Essenes Do Not on Shabbat. The study of the text 11Q13, The Coming of Melchizedek from the Dead Sea Scroll, and what it means to us today. Already in progress from the Vero Yahad. Well, I'm your host, Jackson Snyder, and I'm here with Commander Lee Hayhurst. We're at the actual Vero Yahad building in sunny Vero Beach, Florida. I wanted to just mention to you before we get started here that we still have quite a few of Eisenman's New Testament code books and his New Jerusalem book. If you haven't got yours yet, you can get those free of charge from us by just sending me an email to veroyahad@gmail.com with your address. Ask for those books and we'll send them out to you. That's about $45, $50, $80 value when those things were new. In fact, they're first editions. And you can study them along with us. We've got a New Testament code group. It's not very active, but when we have a New Testament code event, it's pretty well attended. And certainly it's very interesting. I don't know if you're familiar with the exegetical methods of Eisenman, but they are cutting edge. And he's also known as the one that has freed the scrolls from the scholarly and religious community back in the early 90s. So people like us now can get a copy of the Dead Sea Scrolls for less than $10. I might say that the scrolls came up out of the ground in 1948 through 56. And there's a prophecy within those scrolls that I have read, and I can't find it now. But what it says is that when the book comes out of the ground in some far distant era, that the priesthood of the Zadokites and the movement of the sons of Zadok, that is the Essenes, would begin again. And that movement would be the movement that would bring forth the amelioration or the healing of the earth and the restoration of all things. And that's a very exciting thing. It makes me understand why there's a conspiracy to keep those scrolls under wraps for, nearly 50 years in the scholarly religious community, primarily of the monastic Catholic Church, so they can control it. Look, they read them. They saw what was in there regarding the prophetic evaluation of this latter day, and also the extreme familiarity of the scroll, what would I say, the scroll mystique with primitive Christianity. And it's nowhere more evident than what we're going to look at tonight, and that is primarily the text 11Q13. When you read the Qumran Siglum, the number at the beginning is the cave that the scroll or material came out of. The Q means Qumran, of course. And the number after, in this case 13, is the scroll or material number that came out of the cave. Does anybody know the real name of Qumran? I think Khirbet Qumran, or the ruin of Qumran, is an Arabic name. The actual Hebrew name for the place is Sekaka. S-E-C-A-C-A-H, Sekaka. So I often refer to it as Sekaka. And Cave 7 of Sekaka is very important too. Inside that cave were found fragments of scrolls in Greek. Those scrolls identified by O'Callaghan back in the 70s as being pieces of the New Testament books of Mark, Romans, 1 Timothy, and a couple of others. Of course, that's disputed by the church. What would the Greek fragments of the New Testament be doing in one of the Qumran caves before 68 AD, when the scholars say they were not written until somewhere around the beginning of the 2nd century? And then a scroll jar with the word Roma, written on it. That gets you suspicious about what was going on in Qumran at the time when those scrolls were purloined away, and just what kind of affinity that they have with the New Testament text. You'll have to excuse me tonight I'm a little tired. I've been in the hospital, and I'm going to go back tomorrow. And so I usually am try to be real comical and upbeat. Tonight, of course, you've noticed how down I am and how unanimated. So I just want you to know, if it's your first time, usually, we're going to try to entertain you as well as train you. That must have been a censorship. All right, let's start out with the word of prayer, shall we? Father Yahweh Elohim, we're always in your presence, and tonight we're in for a special period of learning perhaps some things that are quite new to us, but things that we should heed, because you have revealed out of the bowels of the earth some important information for what that material says is the last days. Why would it come forth at the verge of the 7th millennium of human history, insofar as spiritual history goes? Why would these things be purloined and hidden away for all these years by the religious and scholarly community? And why is it now that you have put these in our hands, given us responsibility for them? And is it in order to bring forth the movement that was predicted through Melchizedek and then later transferred over to our Savior Yahshua HaMashiach? Is that our responsibility? I ask you to tell us and make it perfectly clear, because if it is, then we ask you to give us the power and authority against the Belial and his evil and wicked agents in this world to go forth with this and bring it to a world in desperate need of healing and of deliverance. We ask this in the name of Yahshua HaMashiach. Amen. All right, there are some givens. These givens I have already showed you in various other audio seminars online. And I don't want to go over them again to take the time. I would love to, because I love talking about this. But they're out there. And if you want to go out there and get the full background of the Zadokite Essene movement and the Dead Sea Scrolls, between Onia and myself, we have a library of, I would say, probably as much as 100 hours of teaching on this, and some very specific teaching as well, and also some very beginner teaching, some novice people that are just coming into the scrolls. We have a set of lessons on that, and then of course Onia has some very, very deep stuff and has made many discoveries in regards to this material that has the potential of changing everything we know about the faith that we follow. So one of the givens is, first of all, Zadok was the leading priest of the Jebusites. He was a man. And in fact, his name, Melchizedek, or Melchizedek, in the earliest versions of the scripture that I've seen, is not a name at all, but rather a title. Melchi means leader, or leading specifically, and Zadok is a synonym for priest, or righteous priest. So we understand that the first Melchizedek, or Melchizedek, was a man in a dynastic priesthood of the Jebusites. And if you know anything about Jebus, the city that I am speaking of, you'll know that that was later called Jerusalem in the time of King David. So when David comes into Jebus and he conquers Jebus, he receives its priesthood. Why? Because it wasn't a pagan priesthood. It was a priesthood of the Elohim called El Elyon, which is translated in our pagan Bibles as the Most High God. So he was a man, not a demigod, not an angel. He was one of a succession of Melchizedeks, that is, leading priests, whom both Abraham and David accepted as true priests of the same Elohim that they worship. Now his line continued to serve El Elyon from at least 1800 BC up until 175 BC. We're talking about 1600 straight years of Zadokite priesthood in the service of El Elyon. And there's no reason to doubt that that isn't the case. In fact, Josephus himself, who was of the priestly class, tells us that this particular priestly clan had been in the office of high priest for 1,000 years. So we're talking about, in some, if we look at the scripture, we're talking about 1,600 years of the dynasty of priests. Of course, the one we encountered in the time of David, his name is Zadok. And the last priest that we know of in the beginning of the 2nd century, his name was also Zadok. So we're starting with one in the time of David, and even after the Zadokite priesthood was cast out of its position of so many millennia, the last one that we know of is also named Zadok. It just happens to be Yahshua HaMashiach's great nephew. Hey, Jesse, turn your mic off. Yeah, we're going to have to say bandwidth. So after 175 BC, as you know, that was the time when the priest was Honi the circle drawer. Descendants and allies became known as the sons of Zadok. There was a usurpation of the priesthood. There was one of these priests that had gone bad and had his brother, the high priest, was implicated in his murder. You want to shut that door? Okay, thank you. Implicated in the murder of Honi or Onias, the high priest, which we can read about him in the books of 1st and 2nd Maccabees. And it makes it clear that the people of the Zadokite line and their allies, the righteous priesthood of the temple, were exiled. And they were sent out through the use of a massacre, primarily on behalf of the Pharisees against them. Some of them went to Egypt, where they set up a new Zadokite priesthood in Heliopolis. Some went into the wilderness of Damascus. That means just simply the whole province of Damascus, which we would call today Perea, or that particular area there outside of northern Israel in Syria. And just to name a few of the line of these priests that we hear about from Scripture and know were priests of this line are, besides Zadok, the priest of King David, King David proclaiming that the house of Zadok would be priests forever and ever. We also know that Ezra, well, we'll start here with King Joram, a king of Judah, was also a Zadokite, and we find him in the genealogy of Messiah Yahshua. We find him in that genealogy. His mother's name was Yarusha. She was the daughter or granddaughter of the high priest Zadok in David's time. So King Joram takes on both bloodlines of king and priest and passes them down to the family of Yosef and Maria, Yahshua, Yehuda, Shimon, and the rest of the brethren there. They all had that priestly blood. That's why they were looking to them as Messiah. Could you turn some air on in here? Thank you. He's not my slave. He just is dedicated. Thank you. So they lived for a century in exile, both in Syria and Egypt. And fourth, the given is that they were known in the time of Yahshua as Zadokites, or by some, especially Greeks or Hellenists, as Essenes. Now, where does that word Essene come from? Well, I'm pretty sure it comes from the word Hoseh in Hebrew, which means doer, or doing, or to do. Doers of what? Doers of the Torah, not just hearers only. Because as our brother Onia has proven, the scrolls that they brought out of the temple in Jerusalem when they were exiled, thank you, include some of the originals of the texts of the Tanakh. And he is proving right now that our Deuteronomy, for instance, has been highly edited by probably Pharisaic scribes during the time of the exile of the Zadokites. So when they left Jerusalem, they could take very little with them. They were persona non grata, but one thing that we learned from scholars that they were able to take were the sacred books of the temple. I leave it to him. I leave it to Onia to show you in his seminars how our scriptures have been modified from the originals that have just come out of the ground when he has his turn or during his seminars that he has online. Okay, another given is, at some time these Essenes began to integrate with the communities of Israel. Before this they lived off by themselves in wilderness camps primarily, but soon they came to know a teacher of righteousness to send them in the perfect way of understanding not only Torah, but also their destiny. Think of yourself as an exiled people wandering in the wilderness, and all of a sudden one is brought forth by Yahweh to lead you into all righteousness, what you were seeking in the first place, what you were bringing to Israel that rejected you and put you out and chose instead licentiousness, Torahlessness, and every kind of abomination and sin, even in the great temple of Jerusalem. And there you are. The teacher comes along after they had been wandering some 20 years in the wilderness. He has the way. And in the scrolls that came out of the ground are numerous historical and autobiographical texts by this teacher who explains exactly what happened, this historic roundabout of the whole thing, and who these people are, and what they believe, and the texts that surround the scriptures that we know of. I mean, the canonical scriptures, numerous sectarian, as they're called, texts that describe this movement and what Yahweh wanted to do with this movement in the time of the end. Now, there are actually two end times when it comes to the scrolls. One end time was in the first century. The second end time was at the end of time. The first end time was there was going to be one of two things happen. Either all evil was going to be redeemed from the earth, or the movement was going to be destroyed. And that came in the first century with the Roman occupation and final destruction of Jerusalem. The second end time is at the end, as they say in the scrolls, in a long future era, when the books would come back out of the ground and the movement would start again. So at this time in the first century, they were integrating into Israel as surely as we're born. Yahshua Mashiach and his family and kin and those that came before him, like Judas of Galilee in 6 AD, were part of that Zadokite movement, sons of Zadok, and that's what the gospel writers are trying to tell us when they put that genealogy in there, with King Joram and so many priestly names, and certainly the descendancy from David, the king. With that blood, he was to be the king to come and the priest as well, king and priest. That's where we come to Hebrews. We'll get to that in a few minutes. From the consensus of the sources that we have on him, and we've got a lot of sources on Melchizedek, at least from the sources that are messianic, that is Zadokic or Essene sources, Melchizedek turns into something new. He has abandoned becoming just the man who started the line of priests, and he's become something of an Elohim. He's appointed the priest of the most high place, what's called in technical term the pleroma, or the highest fullness, way up there in the seventh heaven, where dwells the Father Almighty with his throne beside him, on which this Melchizedek, as high priest of the heavens, sits. We go through the priesthood again in the scripture. We get to Ezra coming back from the dispersion, bringing back the book. Ezra's from the house of Zadok. He starts again. After that, we have another priest. His name is Ezekiel, who tells us in his prophecies, especially in 40 through 44 of Ezekiel, that in the time of perfection, the Zadokite priesthood would continue to be the holy priesthood of the world, and that this line of Melchizedek would be given the responsibility of the liturgy and the calendar of the world of the kingdom for the rest of eternity. So we wonder about the calendar today, and we've got so many calendar creators out there using every kind of source, every kind of moon, probably even the moon, half moon on the outhouse, to try to figure out what the right calendar is when we have that calendar. In a Davidic kingdom of the future, or even now, what calendar would a David king and a Zadok priest be using? Well, the same one they used in the kingly time of David on earth, which we find in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And there are many of us now that are keeping this calendar in the best way we can understand it, because if it's going to be the calendar of the millennium according to Ezekiel 44, then we should be keeping it right now if we're a millennium people. His descendants are recorded throughout the ancient texts as priests, including some of the other ones. I mentioned Zadok, the woman priest Yarusha, King Joram I mentioned, Phinehas, priesthood of Phinehas, Ezra, Ezekiel, Onias, the priests of the scrolls, Judah the Galilean, those that were zealous for the Torah according to the Acts. That was another euphemism or technical term for these people, Zadokites and their allies, those who were zealous for the Torah. The dynasty of Yahshua, Thudas, Yaakov, Shimon, Zadok, Zakar, Yaakov, and the final one, Zadok in the 2nd century that we know of. So forever gradually developed into the legend and the lore of Melchizedek among the Zadokite Nazarene Essenes. He was no longer just a man, but he became a divine man. Next we get into the lore. Are you familiar with 2nd Enoch? Hey, Dawid, 2nd Enoch, we don't know where it came from. But what we find at the end of it is a very strange text. It's called the birth of Melchizedek. And if you're familiar with 1st Enoch, you know in there's a section on the birth of Noah, a very unusual birth. They think Noah is a Nephilim when he comes out of the womb because he looks so different. That's right. He was all white. One section of 1st Enoch says that he was a white bull when he came out. I'd like to see that. Noah came out white, so his father, he goes to Methuselah. Methuselah goes and finds his father Enoch, right? What is this guy? Is he a Nephilim? Is he a spaceman? Is he an alien? He's an alien. What? Okay, so we have in 2nd Enoch at the very end of it. 2nd Enoch's a great book. Nobody knows where it came from. It didn't come from Qumran that we know of, but it's very Qumran-like. We've got a birth of Melchizedek that's very much the same. But you see, Melchizedek, the reason that Hebrews says that he doesn't have any mother or father is because Melchizedek is born from the sister-in-law of Noah, who is dead. She's dead. And she... Lamech. Oh, Onia told us there are 2 Lamechs. Are you sure you got the right one? Okay. Anyway, the mother of Melchizedek's dead. That's why he doesn't have any genealogy according to Hebrews. But anyway, he comes out the same way, white, kind of looking like an alien, and everybody's wondering because the kid comes out talking and he comes up prophesying, and he comes out obviously holy like Noah did in 1st Enoch. So, all right, so maybe he was an alien. This is the lore that comes along with the legend of Melchizedek. No longer a man, all of a sudden he has a miraculous birth from a dead woman, and he comes out as something of a in between the dimensions, a 3rd and 4th and 5th dimensional kind of kid that is like when he was 12 years old, he'd go up to the temple and argue with the Sadducees, something like that. Melchizedek, from this particular perspective, serves 3 special times in history. He served as a flesh and blood man in the priesthood. He serves as a guardian like Enoch, kind of a divine son of man over the times of the priesthood when he isn't there personally. And then he comes forth again in the end time as, well, I'm not going to tell you what as, because we're going to get to that in 11Q13. And that's where we go next, to the fullness of the lore. I'm not going to read this text. I'm going to just give you the high points of what it says. You can go out and try to muddle through it if you want to. It's out there on my website. We've talked about it numerous times on veryahad.org, and there's teachings on it. We find the fullness of the lore expressed in the coming of Melchizedek, just as it has been entitled by scholars, is pretty much exactly what it's all about. And in a nutshell, it's that when the time is right, in the end, in the last Jubilee, this Jubilee not by a calendar, but by the appointment of Elohim, then Melchizedek is going to come, and we know the story of Yahshua HaMashiach, what he's supposed to do in the end times, right? Well, everything that we know about Yahshua from our Christian faith and our Hebrew roots and our imagination, they're all in 11Q13, column 2. Melchizedek, no longer a leading priest, but he's evolved through the fantasy and revelation and lore within the Zadokite, or what was called the Melchizedekian movement, to become a greater interlocutor than even Enoch, who was between Elohim and the angels, the reporter or the author. Enoch, the author, we find Melchizedek in even a greater position in 11Q13. We find him as that he will return all that is rightfully belonging to people that have been stolen from, people that have been demeaned, people that have been put down because of one socioeconomic or spiritual value or another. He is going to replace all of that. These people are considered captives in the text of 11Q13. He returns what's rightfully theirs. He is the Taheb. He is the restorer of all things. And he does this in the context of Yom Teruah, the day of the trumpet in the 7th month. Why is it important to keep his calendar? Well, how are you going to know when that is unless you have that calendar? All the captives will be freed. Now look, when he talks about captives, he is talking about the Yahad. What is the Yahad? All right, why do we have that name? Yahad means something like unity, or the translators of the scrolls use the word community.
Hello, this is Jackson Snyder. We're going to take a little break now to present some very important messages, but we will be right back here on Hebrew Nation Radio. Jackson Snyder Presents is back, and the program is already in progress.
It is a derivative of the word echad, meaning oneness or unity. Yachad is the unity of a community together. He is not talking about Jews. He is not talking about Gentiles. He is not talking about people in the Corinthian church. In this text, he is only talking about the sons of Zadok and their allies, whom he calls the sons of light. Think of that word, sons of light. What does it remind you of, especially in the New Testament? First thing I think of is the prologue of the Gospel of John. The light of men, the light that would draw all men. When I'm lifted up, I'll draw all men. I am the light of the world. He's not going to restore those that are not drawn to the light. This Melchizedek in our text is releasing from trespasses of sin and atoning for the sons of light only, those predestinated to the order of Melchizedek. This is not a matter of willpower. This is not a matter of making a choice for Jesus. This is not a matter of the sinner's prayer. You have no choice in this matter when it comes to Melchizedek. Your only choice is to be chosen. Your only choice is to be chosen. Many are called. What does he say? Few chosen. Few chosen for the sons of light. Yes, the redemption is from trespasses and debts. Now, don't we get a very close approximation of this idea from what's called the Lord's Prayer in Matthew? Is that Matthew 5? If you're like me, you used to recite this in church every week. Our Father who art in heaven. What we have there is an entire Melchizedekian Zadokite prayer. Thy kingdom forever and ever. And those that don't belong to this kingdom by their predestination to it have no place in it. Next, from the text, there's a decree of the time of Melchizedek's favor. Don't we get an idea of Isaiah 61, the time of favor, the acceptable time? Yahshua stands up in the Nazareth synagogue and he proclaims the acceptable time. But here in the text, the decree is the acceptable time of Melchizedek's favor. Melchizedek has become one with Elohim, and Elohim himself. Yes, the proclamation of Yahshua in Nazareth. He's almost proclaiming himself to be the Melchizedek that the synagogue was probably an Essenes synagogue. Himself, that Melchizedek that they knew about. They weren't Christians, and they probably were not rabbinical Jews. Listen, the rabbinical texts on Melchizedek are almost all negative. This is why Ezekiel, for instance, was not read by proselytes to rabbinical or Pharisaical Judaism. This is why Genesis 6 was off limits to students of rabbinical Judaism until they'd already studied with their rabbis for 2 years. They couldn't handle it. And these texts, by the time they got to us in the first century and beyond, no longer existed. What we got is a little notice in Genesis, 14? We got a little notice in Psalm 110, and we got something funny in Hebrews chapter 5 and 7 that we'll get to maybe if we have time. We're doing it on time right now. Melchizedek is coming to free the captives. Lee and I was talking about a little bit ago. What are the captives? Well, of course, they're the sons of light, but wouldn't they also be the kinds of people that Yahshua came to redeem? Even the blind men, none of them come back. Were they blind men or lame men? I can't remember. The leper, he says, go to the high priest. Go wash, go to the priest. Don't tell anybody. Did they come back? No. These people are not in this kingdom of Melchizedek. And in there is quoted, how beautiful are the feet of him that bring good news. Although they quote it this way, how beautiful are the feet of the malach, the messenger. Doesn't that mean messenger? Malachi, my messenger. Yeah. It means angel too, right? An angel's a messenger? Yeah, okay. Malachim, there's two of them. So we've got, how beautiful are the feet of the messengers, the malach that brings good news on the mountains. And he's interpreting it for us that the mountains are the prophets. And we have Melchizedek standing as the messenger on the prophets. And not only that, but we have Melchizedek that is equated with Moshiach. The word is right in there. We've got the Messiah, Melchizedek. That's again why the text is called the coming of Melchizedek. You can think of the second coming of Yahshua. Well, we've got the second coming of Melchizedek, extremely similar to what we understand from our Christian background. Nextly, Zion or Zion is not considered to be Jerusalem, but considered to be, listen, a temple and a city made of living stones. You know what I'm saying? Doesn't that concept come out like in 1 Peter or something like that? 2 Peter? A temple made of living stones. Why? Because the temple was so corrupt it couldn't be a temple anymore. The only temple that could be holy enough for Messiah and Yahweh would be a temple made up of people who were of perfect holiness. And that answers the question, of course. What's the big question? Why no pooping on Shabbat? Way into the bowel habits of the Essenes. So they had the Torah and they had the full scriptures, but they also had the rules. And in the rules, there's some confusion here because I've had people say to me, well, they can't add to the Torah. No, they can't add to the Torah. I've had several people tell me that and say that these rules were evil that they had because what they were doing was adding to the Torah, which it has nothing to do with the Torah. I mean, everybody has rules in their household or community. Let me think of one right now. I mean, where I live, I can't put a sign out in the front yard. I don't know why. It's part of the rules, the holiness rules of the community. All right? The Essenes had community rules of holiness because they lived, some of them, in community, and they had to get along. They lived in wilderness camps. What were those wilderness camps for? They were militia camps. They were places where they were planning warfare to be on the side of Melchizedek when he came. That's a little different. I'm going to get into that here. Another reason why they didn't poop on the Sabbath. But part of the holiness rules were that they carried a little trowel, and when they came into the community, listen, nobody was born in there. These communities were strict because they had to be strictly holy according to a code given them by whoever happened to be the righteous teacher that was alive at the time. That was also a continuing Morim kind of thing where they had successors to the teacher of righteousness, and we are convinced this is the succession went from the original teacher of righteousness that rose up out of the desert to lead these people onto the dynasty of Yahshua HaMashiach. We've got a teacher of righteousness called Judah the Galilean. He's zealous for the Torah, and the establishment kills him. And then we have rising up Yahshua HaMashiach of the same blood, Zadokite blood. He shall be called a Nazarene. What do you think that is? Take a look at Acts. It even says the sect, or actually the heresy of the Nazarenes, only speaking of Paul being a ringleader of it. Paul was probably a ringleader of the sect of the First Baptist Church. Anyway, then we have Theudas that comes up. Theudas is the brother of Yahshua. In 44 AD, he leads a group of Zadokites out and their allies out of Israel over the Jordan River. He says he's going to bring them through the Jordan River on dry land, which that sounds pretty hard to do, but it's really not that hard because I've been up there where Theudas, Judas crossed the Jordan in North Israel, and I crossed over there myself. It's very much like a marshland in the Jordan River. Is about 4 or 5 feet across and about 3 inches deep. It disperses up there and comes back together later on. So you say you're going to part the Jordan River, brother of Yahshua, and take them out on strike? No, you're not. The governor is going to send people there to get you and your full band of 400 before you get out to the wilderness camps. And he's going to take you, Yehuda, and he's going to chop your head off as a seditionist. So there's 3 gone. Crucified, heads chopped off. We've got a foil for this Theudas or Judas in the New Testament. His name's James the Great, who had his head chopped off, according to Acts chapter 12. He got his head chopped off. Why? For preaching the gospel? For preaching love and grace? Did he get his head chopped off for preaching justification out of Romans chapter 5? I don't think you got your head cut off for that. It's like Paul, he says, I've been beaten to pieces, let down in baskets, stoned, for preaching Romans. I don't think so. I think there was some sedition here. They didn't call them zealots for the Torah for nothing. Even James the Just, the next one that comes along, he says to Paul, look at all these zealots for the Torah. He's a zealot. I mean, I think he was trying to get Paul killed up there in Acts chapter 21. Paul, take these Gentiles right on into the temple. They're waiting for you in there. Well, you know, Paul knocked James down the steps years before of the temple and almost killed him, left him for dead. So I guess there's a little revenge. You don't think there's a revenge motive here?
No.
No.
No, I think we have to think that Yaakov was above that.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
he was Yeshua's brother.
Well, look, it doesn't say Yaakov. It says the elders.
The elders did what?
The elders. It won't tell you Yaakov does that.
Oh, okay.
It says, the elders did that. Get these guys' heads shaved and bring them down from Greece.
Maybe it was a good idea, but it just turned out bad. You know, maybe they thought it would be okay.
Well, yeah, I guess so. Well, he says, show them all that you're a good Torah-keeping Jew.
Yeah.
It sounds like a setup to me. So,
no, okay.
So James is stoned in 62 A.D., and he's gone and takes over the next brother of the Zadokite line, called Simon Clopa. Now that's another brother of Yahshua, and Simon Clopa hangs in there. You know, he was an Essene. He lived 120 years, the historians tell us, but in the end, they hung him up on a cross as well. And after him, another one came along whose name was Yaakov again, same bloodline as Yahshua, and they did away with him. And the final one that I know of was named Zadok, from the Yahshua's great nephew.
Oh, Shimon?
It was the offspring and descendants of Jude, the one that led them out over the Jordan River into the wilderness.
Simon or Simon?
One where Domitian said, get out of here, yes. You guys are simpletons. And then Trajan comes along and he hangs them all up because they're of the line of Zadok and David. These emperors of Rome, they knew what they were doing. They brought these Zadokites up to Rome, put them on trial, and looked at their hands and looked at their bank account. And sometimes they would say they were simpletons, and other times they would say, well, yeah, it doesn't make any difference if you're a simple farmer. You have the bloodline of Zadok and David. We've got to get rid of you right now. Bowel habits of the Essenes. When they came in voluntarily, nobody came into this unless they were volunteer, because they had 3 years of very difficult trials and tribulations to get into the community. Look, it would be like, what do I have to do to join this church? Well, I know every Sunday I go to the Baptist church. I always have to explain I work there. I have to get paid somehow. You guys aren't paying me anything. I never ask you anything. Well, I don't ask for any pay because I like poverty. I'm an Ebionite like my brother Lee here. We're the poor. We're the poor. We don't care. We're the poor, but we're rich.
Absolutely.
We have the Vero Essene Yahad right here.
Blessings of the Father.
Amen. Blessed. We're Zadokites. We're the allies of them, even if we're not by blood.
Amen.
Hey, this is for us. This is for us. This is no fake stuff from, I don't know, Eusebius or that other guy, The guy that castrated himself, what was his name? I can't remember. No. Origen, yeah, of course. Bowel habits of the Essenes. When they become proselytes of their own accord, we know a little about this because Josephus the historian and priest and general, when he was a young lad, he went into this order and tried to make it, and I think Paul did too. Says he went to Arabia, what in the world was he doing there? And then he went somewhere for 3 years. Perfect timing. They give you a little trowel. Right? Okay. They give you a little trowel, and the rule is that you go somewhere out away from the settlement, and you use your little trowel to make a hole. Then you cover it up, and then you go back to the mikvah, and you wash yourself every time. Now, that was for the wilderness camps. If you're living in the Essene quarter in Jerusalem, it's a little bit different. Because, you see, the Essenes believed that the whole city of Jerusalem within the walls was to be made holy at the coming of Melchizedek, when everything would be restored. Oh, we got to have time for that. I've got about 12 minutes left. The Essene quarter, there was a little door there. They called it the Essene gate. Funny that the Essene quarter became the Christian quarter later. That has to do with Hebrews. What happened in the book of Hebrews. But anyway, these Essenes would not be allowed to within the city of Jerusalem. What they had to do was they had to go out the gate, the Essene gate, walk down a little way to a place called Beit Zo. Beit Zo. House of, what is this right here?
Left hand?
That's right. House of the left hand. They call it the house of the left hand. They in the house of the left. Why was it called the left hand? You know, you had to keep your left hand inside your tunic because your left hand was used for... Yeah, there was something of a lack of toilet paper at that time. You didn't dare bring your left hand out. You use your right hand. If you gestured with your left hand, you would lose your crowd really fast. So they come back in and do a mikvah, clean themselves up, and they don't on the Sabbath because the matter of holiness. Why do they have to keep so holy? No. Now we're going to look at Hebrews, and we're right down to the crux of the whole question of why. In Hebrews, chapter 5 through 10, chapter 7, 1 through 3, and a little more here and there. What I have discovered is a direct dependence of the writer of Hebrews on 11Q13. Line for line, jot for jot, tittle for tittle. This text comes out of the ground, out of Cave 11, and all of a sudden, the mystery of the Hebrews is all cleared up. What's he talking about? Who is he? What is this priesthood of Melchizedek? Is it a Mormon thing? They've got priests of Melchizedek.
Sure.
Are they Zadokites? I don't know. Christians think they're priests of Melchizedek. All I have to do is say I am one, and I am one. We're priests and kings after the order of Melchizedek. Of course we are. We're priests, all right. What do we do? What do I do now? Well, what you do is redeem the world. What you do as a priest after the order of Melchizedek is you fly up in the air to the pleroma, the highest heavens, and you bring retribution down on all evil in the world. Let me see if you can do that. I would love it, you Melchizedek priests, to see you fulfill that, because that's what Hebrews says after and dependent on 11Q13. They're looking for a leading Zadok again, a Melchizedek, a leading high priest. And here, instead of pointing to the heavenly being of 11Q13, the writer is pointing to someone who just recently died, Yahshua, Messiah, identifying not Melchizedek and all these roles I already explained to you. But now he is explaining it in terms of Yahshua, whom he calls the Son, from Psalm 110. You are my son, this day I have begotten thee. He is no longer in the flesh, Melchizedek. As Yahshua is no longer in the flesh either. All of a sudden, Yahshua is the same persona as this Melchizedek from 11Q13. Now, I don't need to say more because I already described what the text says from the scrolls. The text in Hebrew says exactly the same thing line for line. Right down the line, we've got, instead of Melchizedek, the guy sitting on the throne beside the great Yahweh, we have Yahshua HaMashiach there. So the question becomes, who wrote Hebrews and to whom? If you listen to my other thing on this, you heard me say the reason I really started thinking about this is I sit in a Sunday school class at the Baptist church, and I go there. I'm not allowed to be a teacher because I'm not a member, but I end up teaching the class every time. I had a wonderful time last Sunday teaching about Ashtaroth. Yeah, Ishtar. I thought about that. They had their eyes wide open, and afterward, the deacon that was in the class called the pastor in. And they were talking about Ishtar. And I was standing outside, and I thought, I better get the heck out of here right now. Oh, well, it's hard to get a pianist over there. I figure I'm safe. But anyway, they learned about Ashtaroth and Ishtar and what Ishtar is all about. They said, it's in the Bible. We got it in the King James Version here. Yeah, it's in the King James Version. It's a mistranslation. I'm sorry. They said in the Sunday school class, they were studying Hebrews, and the teacher says, well, no, the quarterly says that, what is this passage saying to us Christians? It's for us Christians. What can we get out of this? I said, for you Christians, what is the title of this book? Epistle to the Hebrew. It says nothing to do with you Christians. Nothing. What it has to do, since we find this coordination with the scroll, we have, without a doubt, a Zadokite that has become convinced that this Yahshua called anointed Messiah is the heavenly Melchizedek spoken of in the Qumran passage. So if that's who it is, who's he writing to? Who would know this? Would rabbis know this? No, they hated this Melchizedek stuff. Would Malbuthians want to know about this? Hardly. He is writing to the Essenes. He is trying to convince the Essenes that this fellow Yahshua HaMashiach has fulfilled the role of 11Q13 as Melchizedek right to the letter, one step after the other. That's an amazing discovery. Why? because nobody could ever figure out why that is in there. It has nothing to do really with people like us. We don't know anything about this temple, and besides, what's the guy's name? Monty Judah said that the writer of Hebrews got the temple stuff all wrong anyway, so he threw it out of the canon. It should be thrown out of the canon unless there's some use for it. And here we find it. What we find is a connection as to why the Essene quarter in Jerusalem became the Christian quarter within 30 years. Because people like this Zadokite is convincing these guys in the wilderness and these guys infiltrating the cities, waiting for the coming of Melchizedek, that this was him. What an incredible discovery this is. Hallelujah. It's not a Christian text. Okay, I got 3 more minutes. This is where it becomes important about the Sabbath day. The understanding of these Melchizedekians was like this. The temple was polluted in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was polluted. They did not take part in any sacrifices. Yahshua, Messiah, his family never did a sacrifice because they believed the place was polluted and the priesthood was polluted. It was not the right priesthood. It was not the Zadokite priesthood. It was a priesthood appointed by a heathen king all along. And when he gets sick of someone, he just fire him. Or you wait for someone to come along that would pay some more. As I mentioned in that other audio, that they had set up concessions inside the temple with corn dogs, popcorn, beer, cold beer, whatever else you wanted. Rooms with prostitutes in them. Talked about Yeshua making the judgment on how prostitutes' wages could be used in the temple. Remember? To buy a toilet for the high priest who paid her in the first place. That's the way it was going there. They could have nothing to do with that. They could go out and hang out and teach people and try to bring them over into the movement. So when we have this temple of living stones, there's something higher. It is a representation of what 2nd Enoch tells us at the beginning, 7, if you look closely, there are 10 heavens, 7 dimensions, 7 places, each one atop each other, with the one on top, number 7, the holiest and most set apart of all, where only El Elyon could have his throne in the most holy of the angels. So we've got above the temple made out of living stones, we've got a temple that's even holier than that. In order for the temple on earth of living stones to be a part of that holier temple, they had to remain as holy as they could, or they couldn't fellowship with these angels. But look, it was even worse than that. The second heaven, the second layer, another temple. Third layer, another temple, holier still, where the Belial, the swallower, would be swallowed up by these folks that were so holy in the angels. And it goes up 7 layers high. Well, the thing was, the Essenes thought that Melchizedek was going to come and destroy all evil on the earth, just like I believe about the millennium. That Yahshua is going to destroy all evil on the earth and put the swallower, the Belial, away where he belongs in the darkest pit, and that there's going to be a time of restitution and wonderment, exactly as 11Q13 says. But you see, these fellows thought they would be part of that. And so they had a militia out there in the wilderness where they learned to fight and the strategies of war. Why? Because they knew on the Zadokite calendar that one day soon, on the first day of the 7th month, that trumpet was going to blow. And if they were not holy enough and set apart enough to have fellowship with the hordes of militant angels coming down in a vortex and a wind and a power onto earth to destroy all evil, they wouldn't come. What they thought was, according to their text, one of 2 things is going to happen. When that trumpet blows, either we're going to be destroyed by evil, or we're going to set the standard of holiness so high that the angels from 7 dimensions are going to be utilized and empowered, and they're going to come flying down as an army and go out to the world and destroy every evil thing and every evil agent that was predestined to Belial, and put them all away and clean the earth up, and that they were going to go forth with their swords and their spears, and they were going to be part of that movement. One thing or the other was going to happen. Now, that's why they didn't on the Sabbath. It was considered work enough on the Sabbath to destroy their possibility of getting angelic reinforcements when the trumpet blew. Yes, well, it took 3 years to get in there. In the 3rd year, you had to be out in the desert for the whole year, fending for yourself. And we find that concept in a text there called Song of the Sabbath Sacrifice. What happened? What happened was the angels did not come. Someone on the Sabbath. This is Jackson. Time to quit. But if you're interested in Essenism and the study of the Dead Sea Scrolls as they apply to our faith, there are many hundreds of hours of such teaching at veroyahad.org. Free of charge. Just download what you want. And I might add, we've got a lot of other resources here, and they're all free. Just let me know. veroyahad@gmail.com. Yahweh be with you. Be good and be well.
This is your host. Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed our variety show, Jackson Snyder Presents. This is a presentation of the Vero Essene Yahad in Vero Beach, Florida. If you would like more information about today's broadcast, email jackson@hebrewNation.net or visit HebrewNationOnline.com. Until we meet again, may Yahweh keep you safe and close to home.